So we're gonna go through this together then, this chapter 9, since perhaps none of us have.
Laura, have you read it? Okay, we got 2 people here that read it, huh?
I was really looking forward to reading it next week.
I hope you still do. So this tradition of saints, monks, and silence, that's I don't know that if that's necessarily what you think of when you think of the Celtic tradition. I know we think of things like pilgrimages and sacred sites and thin places, and that the monks would have been copying, perhaps, or then I started thinking, when God, I don't know, when God breaks into our life.
Sorry, I'm trying to turn off the sound. That's what I'm trying to do. It's the wrong button.
And when God breaks into our lives, I think sometimes we've seen how that happens in different places. Like, I'm not going to be able to think of one good example, but maybe if I continue, you'll think of one. Like at the same time, something can be happening without any knowledge of other people knowing it's happening, but it's happening for them too, the synchronicity of something. So in the 3rd, 4th, and 5th century, and what they said in the Egyptian tradition, where people like Saint Anthony and went into the desert and lived, in caves. And I think there were a lot of them who lived in caves. And then, looking across and saying, like, how did that guy get over there? And how come there's so many of us in the desert? But reading what she wrote, that maybe they went into the desert because of the changes that the nationalization of Christianity brought about. Because when Constantine made Christianity the national religion of Rome, right? It changed, obviously, the small house church idea. It changed who was, there had not been government involvement in church. And when Constantine made it, yes, that afforded the ability of lots of money to build big churches and big places to worship, but it also began to influence bishops and clergy and so forth about how to, kind of align themselves with the Roman government. And it continued, right? I mean, that intersection. Does Cello disagree?
She's saying hallelujah.
Okay, good.
She's not practicing silence.
She doesn't know what that word means yet.
So anyway, that would continue with the right of kings and all the way that the church was involved in monarchies throughout, until the mid 18th and 19th century. So it was the Irish who went off and settled places or got in boats in the wars or traveled to places to find where God was calling them to. And in this case, what we hear of today in St. Coleman would have been the same, right? He went off and lived for 7 years somewhere by himself. So, did it mimic the 4th century monks that went into Egypt, or were they happening at the same time, or was there something that was, because it was just at the same time, if you think about that, St. Francis had gone and lived in poverty with animals, which is also kind of a similar theme to this solitude. So, sometimes I wonder about how God's working in our world. Does it necessarily mean that it was influenced by St. Anthony, or did it just happen at the same moment? Was a time ripe for that in the whole world. And there's nowhere to know. That was 1700 years ago. So record keeping was quite bad. No one thought they'd have to explain it to us in the year 2024. But that's how she's written the chapter. Because she starts off by saying they were profoundly influenced by the desert tradition. And since they were not able to go literally to the desert, they went to wild places. Good morning, Kate.
Good morning.
And do any of you had that experience of going into wild places? Taking time of day. That's
Wild. What? You mean like desert places away from civilization, or I mean like the priory I used to go to from time to time was a hermitage in the woods. But it was a, you know, pre-planned amount of time, and I'm sorry, I've got the door closed from her, but I'll mute for right now, and maybe she's gonna calm down.
What is that?
Somebody is deigning to walk by our street. And that she thinks that's her territory, and if anybody's on it, she parks out.
No one's getting in without you knowing it, that's for sure.
It just made me think on Sunday, my brother was in town, we went to Bird Rock Falls and just, just talking about being out in nature and enjoying it. I don't go to the wild with lots of animals and stuff like that, but I always think the closest thing we do up here is just sitting on a deck or taking a hike like that. And then I love that because it actually had the scriptures. Have y'all ever been to Bird Rock Falls?
No.
I have never either.
Where is Bird Rock Falls?
It's on the other side of Lake, what's the lake south of us on 164 going Lake Tuxaway? You take a left after Lake Tuxaway and you keep on going back there and back there and back there. And it is not a long hike. It is gorgeous. You got these two wide waterfalls and you keep on going. And as the river goes down, and it's, my father has breathing problems, so it's not a steep though, even though it goes down, he can manage it all. It's just gorgeous with all the falls. And as you go along the way, there are Bible verses that are posted up there. I guess there's a church retreat area right there that she used and stuff. So yeah, it was just, since I wasn't here because of family, because it rained on Saturday, but it was just, I think about just the solitude and silence of just enjoying and listening to the birds chirping, the water falling.
Oh,
and
yes, sounds
not having
great.
conversations with who you're walking with. And then the Bible verses that makes you think about things. It was just a neat, closest I can get to a lot of solitude.
Right.
well, once I was visiting a hometown in Germany where some of our ancestors came by. There's an abbey there, and you can drive up to it, or you can take the 130 some steps and walk up. And as you're walking up, they've got the Stations of the Cross. And just walking up that and the abbey and everything too, that was a place where I felt I was on a retreat. That's a really quiet time.
It's hard to choose that, right? Like I have found it hard to choose to be quiet, to choose to put myself somewhere where, I don't have the comforts of my house, right? Yes, I can sit on my deck and listen to the guy mowing his lawn, or sawing up a tree, or the hound dogs barking. No, I mean, but to go somewhere where none of that is going on, to trust yourself to God in some ways, and to be okay to.
And have minimal, resources.
Yeah,
You take
right.
minimal, that's the whole thing is, it's you and having God feed you with basically with the bountiness of the land, or the minimal things you needed to have to survive instead of glamping here.
Yeah, right. Primitive camping.
Yeah.
Yes,
Yeah.
yes. Primitive camping. And this, what she says is that it's a place where you have fewer distractions. Because you don't know what will happen, right? There's not a predictability. So your sense of control is challenged, isn't it? I mean, leaving yourself like that in a vulnerable position, it means you have to do, I hope means, maybe you're a Bear Grites or whatever that guy is, and you're gonna rely on your knowledge of the, how you're gonna conquer the wilderness. But I think the idea is how you're going to allow God to be God in that circumstance, right? Yeah, yeah. And so, what she says is that often that, the metaphor for that place of wilderness, the cave, is the cell within us. How do we get, as the scripture says, when Jesus says, go into your room and shut the door and pray to your Father who is in secret. And I think, again, that's language, poetic language in a sense, about where is that place in us? And those who practice some sort of centering prayer or praying with an icon, or any kind of different kind of prayer techniques, I'll call them practices, are supposed to, I think, lead us to that cell inside of us, that place where we can be quiet.
Yes.
Right. Right.
Yeah. I occasionally, if I've gone off, I several times in my life come to mind. At one point, we were doing some hiking along the river down here, and whoever I was with, Sharon and my sister or whoever, would always get so frustrated with me because I was lagging behind looking at every leaf and mushroom. So I decided I thought if I could just be out here by myself with nobody expecting me to do anything but what I'm doing, and just sit on the ground and maybe draw some of the leaves or do something like that. Anyway, I just went to the grocery store and got a plastic tablecloth and put it down out there, and I, and it's something that I should have made a habit of doing. I just did it that one time, but it was so, I was in my own world and with nobody expecting anything else. And when I spent some time in England, in Devon, at an abbey there. I spent about 5 weeks there one summer. And I remember going out in the woods one day with a lump of clay. And I just sat down on the ground and I sculpted that clay. And it was just, I was alone in the woods. And those are times that I remember just sequestering myself. Is that the right word? Just getting myself away from everything and being alone with God. And they've been really special and memorable times for me. And why I, don't do it regularly, I don't know. But anyway, that is what this triggers in me, those memories.
Well, those are good memories.
Yeah, exactly.
We all need to do that.
Right, to remember those times, I think is as important as anything, to know that you've had them, just, that's your scrapbook, right? That's good, those are good things.
And the hermitage at the Priory that I used to go, I guess I told y'all that I went there for a weekend every now and then, and one weekend I just spent the whole weekend in there naked. I just stripped down to my bare self. And so I have some weird alone time things that I don't do, but when I do, I think I remember those times.
It was good for you.
Yes.
Yeah. Because it renews something in us. I think it renews in us the connection to God, right? It renews this path that maybe has gotten blocked or covered up or something. So those desert times or whatever that's, or the edges of wilderness, or what did she quote? David Adams is calling it the edges of glory, right? So it puts us in closer proximity to God, not because God moves closer to us, but because, like clothes, Maisie, you've shed something, you're getting rid of something. I think this is such beautiful example of that, just the ways I really do want you all to keep all your clothes on. It's very important to me, but, and as it is, don't worry, I'm not taking any of mine off.
Don't
But I
worry,
mean-
I'm not taking any back.
Right? But,
Not to worry. I don't
If
even
we-
think I could stand myself alone in the prairie anymore.
right, but if we think of that again, in a kind of a sense of what stands between us and who we are, what is it that we have to remove? What is that stuff we have to shed ourselves of? Is it, is it the comfort of something? I mean, we can all think it's silly that, monks used to wear itchy clothing to remind them, or put coins or stones in their shoes when they walk, or hit themselves with cat o' nine tails, or, fast. Just think of all the things that people do in order to be cleansed in a sense. And what are they being cleansed for, or why would they? I just think it's just like that clothing image, right? It's getting rid of the things that we feel have blocked us, clogged us, separated us from God. Now, I'm not about hurting yourself or causing pain or any of that, but that kind of, what is the word? Well, anyway, that those kind of practices we can call old fashioned or not necessary or sadistic or, or masochistic. But on the other hand, what about the things that we do to ourselves in order to prevent relationships with God and each other? I would consider that some of those things that we do, overconsumption of anything, right? That's dangerous and deadly. So, could go either side of this. Like we could say, well, I would never hit myself with cat o' nine tails. Oh no, but I might be willing to stay up late binging on Netflix. That's just, it's overconsumption, right? Like that's me trying to fulfill something that I don't feel like I'm getting, or me eating 2 pints of ice cream. Whatever it is. That's all I'm saying. Drinking too much, or there's lots of ways spending, money that I don't have, using a credit card to finance something that I think will fill me up, which it doesn't. Just as deadly, just as dangerous as maybe perhaps living in a cave for 9 or 7 or 5 years or whatever it is. So before I was thinking of that because I was how ridiculous I've often found some spiritual practices of years gone by, right? Like that, like monks who walk around with stones in their shoes, right?
Right, well, because, it mentions St. Kevin, who lived in a cell where for 6 months the sun did not shine. That would be hard for me if I couldn't see the sun for 6 months.
I mean, you know how hard winter is.
Yeah.
It's just terrible for me, so I get that.
Yeah.
But also St. Kevin, who apparently could extend his arm for the length of time it took for a bird to build her nest, lay in egg, and have the baby bird hatch and then fly away.
Oh my God. Oh, that's simple.
I'm just glad God doesn't expect that of all of us. That's a
But
special
I do
calling.
like that they're particular to the people, right? There's something about that's particular to each person. That sort of attention to that, because oftentimes I can feel like I'm just part of a wheel or just part of a thing. I don't really have any purpose. But then when you read these stories of the saints, can't you see that, oh, God's paying attention to each person? There's particularity to the way God interacts with each of us that we might overlook, or that we can find even no matter where we are, what stage of life we're in, that's possible. Not everybody can go out into the woods and preach a sermon to birds and have them answer you. I've done probably certainly happened for St.
though.
It happened for St. Francis for sure. So he says that St. Column, what was his thing, that he took a I'm not gonna remember. There was a fly to keep him awake. No, a fly to mark his
Mark
place.
his page.
Yeah.
Yes,
And then what was it when he fell asleep?
case.
I can look in the thing, but
Yeah. Um. Yes.
Where is it?
I underlined it.
Yeah.
A rooster. Oh, no, a rooster would wake him for his prayers. A mouse would nibble on his ear if he fell asleep, and the fly would help keep his place in his book of prayers. So a rooster, a mouse, and a fly.
Hmm.
Now Laura
All
was just
things
saying,
that we usually see as great, uh, unpleasant things.
Nuisances, yeah.
That's right.
It's the rooster, like, when you try to sleep in the morning, oh,
yes, roosters don't care if it's 2:30 or 4:30 or 6:30.
yeah.
Right. They do seem to start off earlier than the sunrise sometimes.
Correct.
You were talking, Allison, about how God sometimes intervenes in a what was it? He enters our lives in a timely way that, you know, just an example that we had so much this morning. Sharon and I were both feeling overwhelmed with our schedules and not being able to figure out how we were doing the things that we needed to do, and we were both kind of in a state and feeling like we were already deep into Alzheimer's or something, you know, and and we talked about canceling something that, you know, and trying to control our schedule so that we weren't so overwhelmed. And all of a sudden, one of the phone rang, and it was one of the people that was on our schedule, calling to see if she could cancel because of whatever. And it was like God had just stepped in and said, because we had been stressing on our level, and then we started thinking, what out of all this is what God wants us to do. And we uh, said the okay prayer, I am but one. I can't do it all, but I can do something. What would you have us do? And when we've taken on more than we can do, we need to ask. And so we brought God into it a little bit, you know, instead of just wringing our hands and thinking we had lost it or we're losing it. And then God just came to the rescue.
That was
And
good.
I don't know if that's what you were talking about, him intervening in our lives in little particular ways that we need at the moment.
Right, and just, you know, that sort of awareness that that's probably happening all the time, but we are busy, loud. None of that doesn't mean it isn't good or productive or fruitful or important work. I don't, you know, I'm not judging that. I'm just saying sometimes we can overrun, can't we? We just overrun God in our attempt to sort of do, I mean, Kate, I mean, you deciding this morning that why would you spend time sitting in traffic when you can Zoom from home? While I would love to have you in the space, I just think that's just a kind of listening to God about how would you spend my time today? If it's gonna make me irritated, angry, frustrated, right, unhappy, ornery, I mean,
Don't do
all
it.
you know, don't do it.
Hungry because I hadn't gotten to the
Hungry?
store for 4 days.
Right, whatever that is, right? Like, sometimes we just don't pay attention to that. Right now, you know, our second son is coming for a 2-week visit next week. All the way from Oregon. All the way from Oregon, and by himself, without his girlfriend, and, you know, all the kinds of things that, you know, parents kind of are happy about. I love his partner, that's not what I mean, but, you know, just sometimes getting to spend time with your kid without anything else, or having to feel like you have to entertain or whatever. But I've got my sister on one hand saying, well, what are we gonna do? And when are we gonna get to see him? And can you plan something? And I'm like, oh my God, I can't, I can't.
have. He's showing up on this day, he's leaving on this
That's
day.
what I said. And anybody's welcome to come here. And that's kind of what I ended up saying. And then everyone's like, well, don't you wanna take him on the boat? Don't you wanna do this? And I don't know. I'll just let him decide when he gets here. I just
Yeah.
can't. I just can't. And I used to be someone who was like planned out every detail of every day for every person in my life.
Yeah.
I mean, seriously.
That's
that
hard
is-
to let go of.
That's what you said, Maisie, at lectionary, or I think about the second half of life, I think. You know, the second half of life, I kind of went, no, I'm no longer doing that. My identity is
Your
not.
eyes were open to what you were doing in a different way than it ever had been, and you were able to see that this was not a productive life. This was an overwhelming life, and um, yeah, and it wouldn't do
Well,
anybody. Go ahead,
having
Kate.
having just sat for 2 hours yesterday trying to get to the church to fold papers, I did learn my lesson that it was more important just to hear what you were saying than to be dog cussing the men hanging from the trees. But I opened my calendar. I look at it. I even got a bigger calendar because when it gets so full, I decide that the bigger calendar will help me.
You can show.
And I mean, I am like, okay, this can't really be my calendar. So let's get a bigger calendar and write it down in the bigger calendar. And it looks worse. And
Yeah.
I am, and then I started thinking about, I mean, it's stuff like just having to get, well, Mary Talbot and Avery will come tomorrow to put Mary Talbot in camp, and then we all turn around and drive directly back to Charlotte for King Kenny's 100th birthday. And then I've got to check on Barbara. It's just so many things that are going on, and you think, and then I thought, what is wrong with you? Because, I mean, it's my presence at places or getting people moved. And I have lost so many, don't get me started. I have lost so many friends in the last month. And I think, well, this is just nuts of you to think this is a big deal that you're racing up and down the highway, moving people when other people really do have major things. And so I just closed the calendar and said, well, as usual, I'll be my Piscean self and wait for somebody to tell me what they want me to do next. And I'm sure that they will, because people are always telling me what to do. But it was just overwhelming. And then I realized how silly, how maybe all these millions of things that I have obligated myself or family things that are moving children around and stuff help me not to dwell on the other sadness, I guess. I don't know.
They might. I hope in the midst of that, though, there is, I know that we can find joy in most anything we do. When we can remove ourselves from the center of it. I think that's when we can put God in the center of it. Maybe we can remove that kind of frustration that we feel. But also there's a recognition at some point that what would we change? What would we do differently? What would we stop? What would we add? What would we do? I think oftentimes our solutions look like yours, Kate. We'll just get a bigger calendar. If we can't write it all in, we must just need more space, right?
Well, I keep saying, why am I not doing something different as opposed to what can I do differently? But it's why I'm, because that's really what's keeping you from doing the what. It's like.
Good question, right? Like when certain things happen, I think there's a way there's some benefit that we receive. I don't want to get too psychological here, but there is some benefit we receive by doing things a particular way. Could be comfort just because it's the way we've always done it. You know the old story, right? Why do we cut the ham in half?
Yeah.
Because years ago, the
I
oven
love
wouldn't
it.
ham. You know, there's no particular reason why we have to cut the ham, except, I mean, now we have a big oven. It'll fit. But we often do things that just because there is some satisfaction or sense of control about that when things feel out of control. And I would say, to just go back to our topic, that silence and solitude, there's something about it that makes us consider that we're out of control. And so instead of spending time in silence and solitude, we cover that up with things to do. And it doesn't have to be days or years spent in a desert. It does have to be about awareness of when you can enter that sort of silence. You know, and if it's 2 minutes, it's 2 minutes, right? I have been overwhelmed often when people say, I do 3 sits a day and 20 minutes a sit. And, you know, I think I'm never going to get there. I'm never going to get there. I don't even care if there was the time in the day. I would find some way to distract myself from not doing something, cutting my toenails. I mean, I would find something to do. So there's that, right?
Yeah.
So, I mean, is it 2 minutes? Awesome. 2 minutes. And I don't mean that tomorrow you have to do 3 minutes and then next week you have to build up to 15. I really don't think it's like that. I think that if you find joy in the 2 minutes, then God will find ways to, you will know something more about God than you knew before. You will. That will become aware to you. Now, I mean, look, come and see me if that's not true. That's fine too. It may be that you just can't be quiet anymore. It's not this week's reading, but in next week's reading, John uses that example of the reading from Ecclesiastes. For every time there is a season. And for every time there's a season. There have been times I've been able to sit in solitude for hours. And then there's been times where I can't do it for 30 seconds. Even if I'm in a centering prayer group, I'm sitting there, it's quiet, but I'm not.
Your mind is.
I am not quiet.
Yeah.
I've still prepared my grocery list, my Christmas list, taught about everybody that I went to 5th grade with. I mean, whatever it is.
Yeah.
You know? Haven't been. Well, no, but I'm sitting in silence, right?
Yeah.
Everyone around me is silent, and I'm having trouble quelling my own thoughts. I'm having trouble beginning again.
Yeah.
And so that's a practice. And I get that. And practice means just like practice for anything, except you're not doing it to get good at it.
No.
You know, it's not like hitting a tennis ball. We do practice hitting a tennis or a golf ball to get better at that sport, or to have some comfortability with it, or to not feel like an idiot when you're on the tennis court, or whatever it is. Not injure yourself, right? There's all kinds of reasons. Prayer, silence and solitude is not to get better at it. It's to listen. It's to listen. Thank you. That's beautiful. It's to listen. And, you know, and I think nature helps us because there's a lot fewer things. Although, you know, I could start trying to go and say, oh, I'm going to start identifying bird calls.
Yeah.
And so that just.
Oh, what leaf is this?
Yeah.
Yeah, and get the app out.
Oh,
Right.
boy.
Yeah. Yeah, so I can figure out 1,000 ways to not be in a listening state. And I just think that goes to show how hard it is and how necessary. And I'm glad she's included it in this list of practices.
Mm-hmm.
And that, you know, and she's, if you need like proof or whatever, she's gone all the way back to the 2nd and 3rd century, right? It's not like this is something new that's happening that we're just pulling out of our hat, right? She's going back thousands of years to sort of say, this is it. And we know it, right? Because we know when Elijah was doing the prophet thing and he's trying to look for the voice of God, and it's not in this and it's not in that. Where is it found? In the still small voice. So we even know in Elijah's time at 600 before Common Era, right? 600 years before the birth of Christ, prophets were doing this. So I have to assume there's always always been a need that if there was another way to achieve it, I think we'd know about it. And even surfers talk about finding that flow on the surfboard, right? Just what that's like when they're in that zone and it's silence. And then the roar of the wave shuts everything else off. And there's nothing else that you can think about in that moment except where you are in that moment. Now, they may have a different intent, but I just always go back to that surfing metaphor because that's it. And if they don't do that, they will not be able to ride a wave. They cannot, or they'll die, right? Because surfing is a super dangerous sport.
Yeah.
Right.
But that makes me think about when I used to snow ski a lot. I love going downhill and snow skiing because my mind wasn't popping over a lot of things. It wasn't like I was having to worry about my technique or anything, but it was just, it silenced my mind in a way of just going with it and just peaceful. And instead of, you get on the lift and you go again, it's like, so it's just, it's nice to feel that silence in the mind.
Yeah, I get that when I'm floating on my back in water.
Mm-hmm. That is a good one. And that's one of the images in centering prayer, right? Is like to be in a river. And knowing things are gonna go past you or under you or around you, but yet you're just going to float. You know, that's not gonna trouble you. You know, yeah. So, what else from the chapter?
Well, for me, it was important that she said, this is in the first full paragraph at the top of 107, that solitude is not a practice just for ourselves, but a practice to cultivate within each of us a greater capacity for living in communion. Because, you know, that brings it to, you know, the solitude is important, but then we come out of that solitude and it does help us live with others.
Well, something on that, how important sometimes it is to be with somebody, but not be talking, you know, that can be more support than anything. If they just need
Presence.
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 Yeah.
Yeah.
And how would we know to do that if we hadn't already done the other, I think is, yeah, absolutely. So it's not an end unto itself, right? It has a different thing. That is a great paragraph. And then she goes on to talk about what we've been talking about for 18 months now, or maybe longer, about discernment. And then, of course, when you have to make a decision, because that's what discernment is, or what am I going to do, or how am I going to do it, or what needs to be done, another part of discernment. Taking some time in quiet prepares us for that. And she talks about how, and you can see it if you've ever read anything about St. Anthony, one of the reasons that he actually went to the desert was to combat these inner demons that he had. And the story, I think if I recall it was, in the cave, he kept seeing these giant monsters, right? And they were, what he realized through his time that they were not giant monsters at all, but they were shadows of bugs. Shadows of spiders, shadows projected onto the wall of the cave that looked like monsters ready to eat him, ready to consume him. But they're tiny little creatures with no power at all.
Wow.
But the shadow, right? So there's something in there about what we think we see, what we think we feel, how big is something that's confronting us, right? And then in the solitude, he was actually able to discover what that was and that God was present. And St. Anthony is also supposedly responsible for giving us the sign of the cross in the name of the Father, Son, and the Holy Spirit as something to ward off evil, as a protection. Still use it that way in liturgy, like the baptismal liturgy. The sign of the cross is made right on a baby's forehead or a person's forehead. It's made over the congregation. It's made, so it's used frequently. In absolution and so forth, there's this motion, and that is one of its functions is of protection.
Mhm.
So not his own protection. Yes, he could just go like this. Or take his sandaled foot and smash it. No, he called on the protection of God, to protect him. So maybe, and I have found that to be helpful when something is terrifying me, particularly in silence, because I am someone who runs from solitude. So I can call on the name of the Trinity. I can call on the name of God to protect me from whatever it is I think, whatever vulnerability I think I have, whatever insecurity I might be having about something, and call on that protection. Because I do believe in that power. And I do believe that, now I don't know that that would stand up against a knife or a gun, or I've never been in that kind of a circumstance, a fist. That's not what I've had to use it for. I'm talking just sort of internally, my own insecurities and vulnerabilities. So not suggesting you go put yourself in harm's way and then, invoke the name of God to protect you. I really don't know if I could stand knowing that had happened. But I do think, like, personally for us, to put ourselves in the hands of a loving God, how could we, I don't think we can go wrong. I just don't think we can go wrong. And if for a moment it breaks that train of thought, if you suffer from, kind of obsessive thinking, which I can really fall into that, if it just breaks the train of thought by saying the name of God the Father, God the Son, and God the Holy Spirit. Right, just like you and Sharon did, Maze, just by saying the daughter's motto, right? Breaking the train of thought about, we're never gonna get all this done, we have too much to do, what are we gonna do, how are we gonna get it done, I don't know, what have we forgotten? Because I think that's also entering to what you guys are thinking about, what have we forgotten that we're supposed to do? God forbid, we've also forgotten something now, something that we consider to be important or want to do. And they are, right? And I think, Kate, in your life too, I'm hearing that same sort of consternation about how can we get this all, how do we squish all this in, right? How do we get it all done? And it's not just buying a bigger calendar. It might be invoking the name of God to sort of oversee this and bless these moments, right? And allow that to unfold as it might, even though, right? Right. Okay, that's okay, we have 10 minutes. All
When
right.
I get, oh, never mind.
What else from the chapter?
Laura's the only one, hey, may have read it too. Only one on top of the
And half
chapter.
of it.
Well, okay, so just maybe, I think there is a theme, and let's go to the last chapter, the top of 109, the last chapter in that section. And it says, when we are waiting for a particular outcome, how many times has this happened? A diagnosis, a result, an answer to a question we have. We are often filled with anxiety as we sit with the unknown. Patience calls us to remember that God's time, which is beyond our chronos or clock time, is present to us in our waiting. We can experience the fullness of time in the midst of waiting for time to unfold. So it's not like, well, when I get to this point, God's present, or when I complete this task, or when I do this thing. No, God's with us in that waiting. And I think if that's not true, then I have no way to explain suffering. Like I have no words for why there is suffering. If God's not present in that time with folk, then there's no, to me, my house of cards falls apart. My what we call in fancy terms, my systematic theology will no longer hold up. So I need God to be present in all time.
Yeah. Last night I was going through a dip in, explaining all the things that I've been feeling, and I was depressed, and I was just pouring all this out. all my anxieties and overwhelmness and all this stuff. And Sharon said, is God in it? Is God in that? And I said, I know he is. I know he is in my head. I know he is. But I can't, some reason, lean on that. I'm just bogged down in it. And, and then this morning when that happened, we were in that frantic, just naming everything that made us frantic and feeling that way. And then consciously, willfully bringing God into it. And then he showed himself. You know, I was just mired in whatever stuff going on inside me and outside me. And the question is, God in it? And at that time, I wasn't able to say for sure that he was in it for me. I knew he was in it, but I couldn't benefit from his presence because I wouldn't let it. I don't know, you know, what that when we get in places like that, if we consciously bring God, open the door for him to come in, then is when he can get through to us.
And since we're a kind of a group of doers, it's really hard to think that it doesn't look like doing, right? It looks like the opposite of doing. It's the pureness of being in some ways, and acknowledging that even in that kind of royal of activity, that could be a desert for you, right? That is a place of maybe where God's trying to reach you, even in that which looks super busy, because that's not what they described in a wilderness area, right?
Right.
That can indeed be your wilderness area, because it just is where you find yourself.
It's a jungle.
It's just, sorry. That sounds scary. Okay, so,
Did you, if you look, the section I liked
okay,
of the part that I read was, it's on page 107 and down at the last paragraph.
yes.
And I thought that was, excuse me, you know, that it brought me back to the, well, you know, we don't, yeah, you got us out of there, but, you know,
Yeah,
all you're sending us is wet bread. Yeah, you know.
Yeah, where are the cucumbers? Right.
Right.
Kate,
And,
Kate,
what?
Macy has the book. Would you mind reading that paragraph for me that you just are talking about?
I'll try. My voice will do it.
No,
In the story, in the story of the Exodus, the great legend of liberation, the Israelites come out of Egypt and wander a very long time, and they become impatient, imagine that, and ungrateful for what has been given to them. It is a story full of humanity in all its brokenness. This is an archetypical top story of grumbling and impatience when we are called out from slavery to almost unbearable nature of freedom. To come into the wilderness is to step right out of the security and comfort. Often when we are on a journey of discernment, we may begin by eagerly sitting in silence in an effort to draw near to the divine and listen for the holy invitations. But over time, if we are not hearing anything or not hearing what we want to hear, we may grow impatient and unsettled. And, well, I mean, that's pretty much my approach. That's pretty much my approach.
Thank you for reading that.
Yeah, I agree. Thank you for reading it.
And I think it's the human condition, you know, you could, like, I could be, I should be, I could have done that, I ought to be in this place, whatever that is, and I hope from hearing that this is a story as old as time, right? And that's on a macro level, I get it, and this is a whole people moving out of slavery. And yet, we can move out of different phases of our lives and still not be completely satisfied with what's in front of us, for sure. I remember like becoming a priest and just complaining all the time. This isn't what I signed up for. This is not what why did I spend all those years? Why did I move my family? Why did I spend all that money? Right, so that I could just remember that, just like, and then feeling terrible that I felt that way. Like this, I was in discernment for probably 12 years to decide. I spent years saying, I'm not gonna do it. And then God would do something else would happen, I'd be like, I am doing it, right? And then there would be, like, there was no bishop in the diocese, so I had to wait. And then there was, something was going on with my kids, or there was, I don't know. It was just always this thing that was happening, right? And so, but even when I finished, I thought, well, or whenever I was ordained, whenever I was serving, whatever, there was never enough. There were never enough cucumbers. I was tired of eating soggy bread. When would I be? But I realized too, I was not ready. Just as the Israelites probably were not ready. I was not ready. I wasn't ready before, I wasn't ready after. I'm probably still not ready for most of what I face, but more ready than I was almost 20 years ago, for sure. But yes, isn't that the feeling we have? I don't know. You remember getting that first job out of college, or your first job ever, or your first thing that was like a grown-up thing?
Your first baby?
Yeah, the first baby.
That was what came to my mind.
Right?
First job.
And you're never good enough, and you still don't know what to do, and then you have that baby, and you're like, why did I want this baby? I can't do anything now except take care of this baby. And I remember thinking that, why did we want this baby? I'm just gonna walk around without my shirt on. This is the way it's supposed to be. And it kind of was like that, right? Like that, there was no way I was making that work. It was like never gonna be enough. And when you're beholden to another human, it can definitely feel that way. Like there's just not enough. So yeah. Okay, anything else, anybody else that struck anyone else, or you wanted to talk about, or did you take any pictures? Did you write any poetry?
Yeah.
Okay, we were supposed to do an acrostic poem, which based on something we saw when we were in the practice of finding desert moments.
An acrostic poem. Oh, wonderful.
Yeah, you remember? It's like whatever the word is that came to you, and then each letter represents a line of it is the line of the poem. So Laura, did you do something?
I do.
Would you like to share it?
I will.
Okay, thanks.
Okay, I chose the word doorway. Desert, a place of introspection, owls hooting echoes in my soul. Orange light on the horizon, rich melodies whispered in the air. Why continue this journey, a spiraling path to what future? Yearning for the soul's slow ripening.
Oh my goodness.
Oh my word.
That's
You wrote that
fabulous.
just at one time.
Laura,
Yeah,
you've
that
written
Way too high.
No, but I
I
thought,
didn't know you had this gift.
yes,
Have you
isn't
always
that
done
wonderful?
this?
Laura is gifted.
Yes.
Yeah.
Obviously.
Well, for us, it's a gift. I know that. And then, but I love that. How much of our reading, how much of our past 10 weeks together did she combine in that poem? Right? It's the doorway image, the ripening, the whole thing is just, it is the discernment, looking at nature for the clues to where God is or who God is or how God is in our lives, just all of that is so evident in that piece of
Like I
poetry.
said, this book has really spoken to me. And it has allowed me to do some things that I had to do,
Right?
Allison, do we have time? And Laura, would you read it again?
Yeah, all the time you want.
Okay.
And if she feels comfortable, maybe she can type it out and we can share it. If not, that's fine too.
Okay. Desert, a place of introspection, owls hooting echoes in my soul. Orange light on the horizon, rich melodies whispered in the air. Why continue this journey? A spiraling path to what future? Yearning for the soul's slow ripening.
Mm,
I know.
That's the second poem she's read. It's,
Yeah,
I bet there's a book somewhere.
I bet there is too.
Laura, did you
those
always
poems.
write poetry?
No, not
No,
until
this is a newfound gift.
this is.
Seems to be emerging.
I think it's great.
I think it's awesome.
It's
Could I-
lovely. It's just absolutely wonderful. That's why I said I bet there's
She
a
has
book
one
somewhere.
more to share.
Oh, yeah, please
Okay.
share one more.
This was from the last chapter when it asked us just to write down different phrases we remember from the Bible or from poetry. And you just jot them down and then you take them and you rearrange them into a writing.
Right.
And so this is what I came up with. No man is an island, so love one another as I have loved you. Both created nevermore. Nothing can ever separate us from the love of God. Beware the Jabberwock, my son. Let he who is without sin cast the first stone. Because I could not stop for death, I will walk humbly with my God. My soul waits for God alone. God is our refuge.
She'll call you right back in a few minutes.
Nice, nice. So
That's
that was it, yeah,
Beautiful.
that was lovely. And I
That's
love-
incredible. Okay.
And that's just what the things that she remembers. And I think you could probably say, oh, John Donne, oh, I could, Edgar Allan Poe, oh, and maybe.
Well, our different week, a different month,
Yeah,
what would it be?
yeah,
yeah.
yeah,
Mhm.
yeah. And so just the way we allow ourselves, I think that the freedom that some of this poetry or writing exercises are given is just, I've stopped judging kind of what I write,
Right.
I
Because that
just,
was always my problem before. If I'm gonna write something, it has to be perfect,
Yeah.
no, it's just to do the exercise itself.
I really haven't even tried to do any of the exercises, and I've been intrigued by them all and thought, oh, I'd like to do that. And I didn't. I'm going to try to go back and see if there's something in me like that that I don't know is there.
Yep. Yeah. You have that gift of painting that I envy. So, and I'm willing to admit. So,
All right, now please, next week, let's read together chapter 10, the practice of seasonal cycles. I'm going to give a handout to this group, and it's also the handout that is online with the material that was sent today. It is the circular Celtic calendar, and you can think about it in terms of what you know about the Christian calendar, what you already know about maybe, I don't know, school calendars. I don't know. Of course, we all know the seasonal calendar, and this just gives it a different. This person who did this calendar. And then, yeah, she's also added, Christian holidays, so. All right, go in peace to love and serve the Lord.
Thanks be to God.
thanks be to God.